Namaste, Ken ji, and welcome to Indic Academy. It's a organization which protects, promotes, and tries to preserve Indian knowledge systems, of which music plays a very big part. It's such an honor to have you with us today evening. Thank you so much, and it's such a pleasure speaking with you. And if we could start at go back to your childhood and your interest in music. I read that you played the piano and also vocals. What was your first interaction with Indian classical music?
Uh, the first, I guess the first interaction must have been when I was in high school and somebody brought in a sitar to the class. And nobody knew how to play it. We looked at it. I looked at it. At that time, I was playing guitar, so I was definitely interested in stringed instruments. But it was just an impression. I was puzzled by it, because no one could play
Hmm.
it. And then I didn't really have any contact again until, well, maybe the Beatles, featured the sitar on one of their songs, and so I heard it for really the first time. But the first actual contact with the music live happened when I was an undergraduate. I was going to a liberal arts school in Iowa, and one evening, none other than the great Ustad Ali Akbar Khan uh, came to that small college and gave a performance, and that's what really uh, tuned me in and turned me on.
How lovely. It's, I think, these chance meetings, for instance, Ustad Amjad Ali Khan, he was saying how he got precisely 7 minutes to play at the Nobel Prize ceremony. And it was too short a time to showcase Indian classical music.
Hmm.
But people still came over and were curious about the sound and the instrument, like you mentioned. So, is that short, brief exposure enough for somebody who's not used to these sounds to set off on a lifelong journey of learning of Indian music, as it happened with you?
Well, I didn't just drop everything after his
Mm.
concert and
Mm.
followed him to California, but in the greater span of time and how the events happened, it was fairly quickly. I definitely saw something that had fascinated me in a way that no other music had ever done,
Mm.
and so it made a very deep impression. And then Kansab mentioned that he had a school in California,
Mm.
and that anyone could come there and study with him. And
Mm.
so me and one of my buddies, who I was doing some guitar playing with, he said, "Ken, let's go out to California and
Mm.
during spring break and check it out." And so we drove from this college all the way out to California, walked into a class, and he was teaching. Big group of students playing all kinds of
Mm.
instruments, and he kept repeating one line. He was trying to get them to learn it, and it was just mesmerizing. And then my friend and I decided that we would come back and take the whole summer semester course there. And at the end, he backed out. He decided
Mm.
he wanted to go surfing instead.
Oh,
And
okay.
so I was left with the question: well, do I really want to do this, or was I just following him?
Mm.
Oh, what the heck? Let's try it. And so
Mm.
I went out there, and then I got totally into the music, how it was being taught. It was a very exciting time. The college was filled with students. Uh, Pandit Ravi Shankar showed up for a couple of
Mm.
days during the summer, and I had my first rhythm lessons with Zakir Hussain.
Mm.
So
Oh,
it it was just a fantastic introduction. And then I decided after that summer that that's what I wanted to do. Uh,
Mm.
and But still, I had to go back to college and finish. My parents were desperate that I would at least get a some kind of a
Mm.
degree because they were a little bit concerned about this Indian music
Mm.
being a viable
Mm.
profession.
Right.
Um, so I did. I got my bachelor degree, but I was going to a very liberal college,
Mm.
and I was able to get credit for having studied at the Ali Akbar College of Music. So
Mm.
I was a music major, and that was part of my music major. So they were very open to my investigations into this music. And then when I graduated, I went back to California and then started a long tutelage with him for over 37 years.
Mm. Interestingly, another Sarod player, Suresh Vyas, learned from his sister Annapurna Deviji.
Yeah,
And
yes.
when he asked, he was I think studying physics or something, and he asked her like, how many years should I dedicate to music if I have to learn from you? So he thought she would say maybe perhaps at the most 5 to 10 years.
Mm.
So she said exactly what you did, 30 years. So he said, if you're willing to give 30 years of your life, then I'll teach you. She was pretty strict, I think, in how many students she taught. And so, what is it in that family, Ken, which, if would you have information on, what is the kind of music that they have inherited from their esteemed father, as well as a lineage that can be traced to Rishi Tansen? What is the quality of the music, and what is their discipline? What is their sampradaya which actually attracted you?
Well, Kansab was a genius. Not he was a fantastic Sarod player, maybe one of the finest that ever lived, but also his musical vision was extraordinary. And and I grew up fascinated with composition and improvisation. That's what I was always. I was just trying. I was always figuring out tunes, and how to shape them and build them and improvise on them. And so when I heard him playing, and then when I began studying with him, I realized he was a source as large as the ocean
Hmm.
of musical ideas. And so it was, didn't take much of a decision on my part. I just thought, this is where I want to feed from this source. So I had no idea how long I would stay with him. I actually, if someone had suggested to me that I might be spending more than even 10 years with him, I said, no, I don't think so. I think maybe I'll take 5 years and then I'll get it. But as time went on, I realized, no, this is bigger. This is bigger than that.
Hmm. So how was the training itself, and is it very different from how music is taught today? For instance, in the college that you teach and lead in Switzerland. For if you just take one raga, for instance, in Southern music today, teachers teach um, things very quickly in a very fast pace. But I think in the past, one rag would take 1 year sometimes. So you had to actually immerse yourself in the quality and the nature of the raga. So has that changed in the West in how music is taught and learned?
Well, even Kansab had to adapt his teaching to be there. First of all, he was teaching students who were basically young adults. There were hardly any kids there, and that's when you usually start studying in India when you're a kid. You're learning with your father or mother. So he faced these young adults who had a great desire to learn, but they had absolutely no idea of the repertoire. And so I think he felt it would have been unproductive to just spend one whole year with one raga. Because in order to understand one raga, you have to understand all the ragas that surround it. Because sometimes the boundaries between ragas is very subtle. The property lines are not clear, easy to see, and before you know it, you're stepping on the territory of another raga, and thinking that you're playing that one raga that you've been working on all year. So he kept recycling and rotating. Of course, starting with the big ragas, Iman Kalyan, Bhairo, the sarangs, but and he would teach us compositions, both vocally and on the instruments, and then that might take up even a month or two of teaching, and then at the end of that time, you'd have a composition that might take you an hour to play, actually, from start to finish, and then the next one would come, the next raga, and so he had a huge repertoire. So before long, we had so much material, and we didn't have time to practice it all, because as soon as he would finish teaching one piece, he'd say, okay, now learn this, and he'd start on another one, and so sometimes I only got to really practice that one composition that he gave us many years later. I'd come back to it and say, oh wow, this is great. Now I can really work on this. So he absolutely filled us with repertoire, with compositions, with songs, with alaps and Drupad compositions, all these things that you need, and he knew that we would learn and forget, and then learn a little bit more quickly and retain a little bit more. And the few students who could really put up with that kind of a long-term study, there'd be a chance that they could get somewhere. But many students came and went. They were curious. They came and stayed for a year maybe, and then they had to go on with their lives. And I just didn't want to stop. So I managed with it, and even when I went to Switzerland to pursue other kinds of music that I was also interested in, I stayed in touch with him, and then before I knew what was happening, I was inviting him to come to Switzerland to give a concert and to give a workshop, and then the next thing I knew, he said, Ken, you have a lot of interested students here. Why don't you open up a branch of the Ali Akbar College in Switzerland, and I'll come every year for 2 weeks and teach them.
The emphasis in Indian music is the gaiki, or in Carnatic music, the vocal, and even in South Indian music, we do not have a separate repertoire of instrumental music, but that's not the case in the North. So, what was his emphasis on the voice? Why was the voice so important in understanding how the instrument sounds?
Well, he felt very strongly that, and he learned it from his father. He said that in order to play Indian music, you have to sing. You have to learn the huge repertoire of vocal styles that he learned from his father. And he said, when you're playing your instrument, you're actually singing inside.
And the students who came to learn from him and from you, were there any who actually wanted to become Hindustani musicians, or did they want to stick to their genre of music and just add elements of Indian music to it, which happens a lot in fusion music today?
Yeah. There were all kinds of students. Students who were beginners in music and just wanted to immerse themselves in this. There were also, because I was teaching at a conservatory of music, there were a lot of very talented Western musicians who started taking my courses there, and they were very fascinated. But most of them, it was just as long as they were students at the conservatory, and then they left, and they already had their Western instruments that they were going to pursue. But along the way, I picked up a few students who were so just moved by Indian music that they just wanted to continue. So now I've some of my students that have been with me for 20 years.
What was his persona? Could you tell us about a little about him? I mean, when we talk about Annapurna Devi, there's so much of mystery and about her. There's not much known, but we do know about how generous she was to her students. She would cook food for them and feed them.
Yeah.
Do you have anecdotes like that about him?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. How many days do you want to have this meeting now?
Yeah. Because somebody said we know everything about music. We know everything about Indian music. We don't want to know about Indian. We want to know what they ate, what they wore, what cars they like to drive, but what actually made them take outside music.
Yeah, yeah.
So what kind of
Well,
a person?
he was a wonderful person. I think especially considering what a difficult childhood he had, because he did not grow up seeking to learn music. He grew up as the son of Ustad Ali Akbar Khan, who basically told him, "You are going to play music, and you're going to practice 18 hours a day." And so he had no freedoms as a child. He had to practice the whole time, and his father would be very tough with him, and so sometimes I think it's amazing that he came out as gentle and loving as he did, because his childhood was not easy. But he inherited his father's knowledge, and I think he loved his father, but he was always terribly afraid of his father. He told us, he said he never looked his father in the eye. His head was always down in front of his father. And in one interview that he gave here, he said, now I can look at his pictures. I can look at his eyes in the pictures. But as long as he was alive, I never looked in his eyes. But he came to America, and he knew he had to adjust somewhat. He couldn't be that tough with the students. And so he taught with so much joy that we just wanted to be with him as much as we could. And then sometimes for the few students who would get to an advanced level, then he would invite us over to his house in the evening for a lesson, and then a cooking session. He loved to cook, and so we all had to help him, and we'd make these long, elaborate dinners, and and the drinks would be flowing, and he'd tell jokes, and he loved to hear good jokes. So he was very joyful person in that way.
What is there an Indian ethos in the sharing of the music, in the sense of what was the relationship between the guru and the shishya? Were there any boundaries, or was it casual? And what about relationship with guru bhais and guru behens? How was the ecosystem of learning?
It was very, let's say, all embracing, because, as I said, he knew that many of the students would not stay for years. Many of them would come and spend a few years and love it and learn it, and then they would also be seeds for others who wanted to get interested in the music. So, in order to build a community of music appreciation in the U.S. For Indian music, you have to have good listeners, and so many of these students who he realized, okay, they're not going to be major performers. I mean, the majority of Indians who study Indian music, they don't become major performers, but they form that community, which without that community, the music wouldn't survive, right? It's not, and so he let anyone come study with him. He didn't have any requirements except they should please bathe before coming to class, and keep their feet clean and be polite. These kinds of just general you know expectations of behavior. But he would take anyone, even without any talent, without any knowledge. There was one guy who he couldn't find any of the notes on the Sarod. He couldn't hear it, and so Khan Sahib was just he told him once, okay, give me your Sarod, and he took out a marking pen, and he marked he drew the frets on the Sarod. He said, now put your fingers there, so he was really accommodating in that way, and there was never any physical abuse. He never hit somebody for not doing the right thing. Maybe some verbal abuse was there, but good natured also. And he knew he didn't have to demand devotion, because he knew that the students, eventually the ones who could learn and the ones who wanted to learn, they would stay with him. That's what it takes. But it was of their will to do it. He wasn't imprisoning anybody.
So, and how is the heritage and the tradition itself for him? Was it something that came up frequently in discussions? Did he give you a historical perspective of the music? Or was it only through the music that one could sense the actual antiquity of the music?
Yeah, he would tell us stories. During the class, he would stop and talk about this raga. Where did it come from? Who did he first hear it from in concert when he was a little boy, 4 years old? He heard that raga. I think he was talking about Narayani, kind of a rare raga. And he said, I remember that singer when I was 4 years old. And he said it felt to me like it was the evening bairagi. So that early morning raga, but played in the evening, which I thought was probably remarkable for a 4-year-old. So the theory and the history of the music all came together. So it was there were not. They had separate classes for theory and history. Also, he had asked some of the students to really lay out the different epics and the different styles, and Drupad and Khyal and the early maestros, and the whole tala system, the rhythm system. So he had some of his advanced students teaching those classes too. But he the main thing that he adhered to was that in the class we should just focus on learning from him. Even he didn't like it when people would write down things. He's, even though he didn't forbid it, but he said, learn with your ears, not with your eyes. That's the only way you can learn this music.
When we talk about history of the art forms, we use research techniques borrowed from sociology and maybe even history, where we look at longitudinal history, we look at personas, biographies. But is there any history? How is music history studied in the West in terms of how the music itself changed over the years. Just, in the short brief of uh, Khan Saab's time to now, do we have historical studies like that in music in the
To,
West?
that have analyzed how Indian music has changed in that period, because
Yes.
Indian music was also was changing in India too during that time, and it
Good.
it started with, I mean, imagine what an impact uh, All India Radio had on Indian classical music. Before that it was just some local things happening here and there, and completely inaccessible to a large audience. So it happened like that, and in America, that music entered largely through popular tracks like the Beatles. So that was the whole first wave in the '60s of interest of young people. It came from the Beatles, and then people like Kansab and Pandit Ravi Shankar. They had to like, okay, now settle down. That Beatles were nice. That was very good what they did, but that was not Indian music. So we had to, let's start the proper way, and again, building up an audience of listeners who could really appreciate the music because they were familiar with it. That was a big part of their work.
So what about the technology aspect? You have worked on innovations to the instrument itself. Could you tell us something about that? And what was the imperative in making changes?
Um, well, for a long time, I was not interested in changing anything with the instrument. I had my hands full trying to play it, but at some point, let's say it started, that I at one point my Sarod wasn't it didn't have the resonance that I wanted to make the sounds, to make the notes last longer. And even Kansab would look at me once in a while and he'd say, I can see your finger is moving correctly, but I don't hear it. He said, I think there's a defect with your instrument, and it was a small instrument, and so he recommended that I get a new instrument. And so his maker, Heyman Sen, the most important Sarod maker in India, who learned the art of Sarod making from Kansab's uncle. So it was all in the family. He made a new instrument for me, and when I got it, the sound was very. It was like a diamond in the rough. It was very loud, but it was brash sounding. It was like, it was so loud that sometimes I had to put earplugs in when I was playing because it was just hurting my ears, and it eventually started making me think that it needs some more roundness in the sound. How are we going to do that? And I started asking people, talking to people, and then also I looked at an old picture of a Sarod that Baba Alauddin Khan had, which had a wooden tumba rather than the brass tumba that you see on all the Sarods now. And I thought, well, what was that? Why, and why was it there, and why did it disappear? And so I always thought that if I would put my ear to the brass tumba, it didn't sound very nice. It sounded very brashy. and in fact, brass is not a resonating metal. It's except when you put it through a trumpet. Okay, but that's a whole different production of sound. So I started experimenting with wooden resonators, and I teamed up with an excellent craftsman here in Switzerland, and we started making different sizes, different shapes, different kinds of woods, and finally we evolved it to the point where I thought, now it's sounding really good. So it was a practical pursuit, and
So
also
that was fitted onto the instrument?
yes, because the brass tumbas, they just screw onto the Sarod. So you can screw them on, screw them off, and so it was easy. All I needed is the same kind of thread, and I could screw my wooden one on, and then we could see what a difference it made. And so it started with that, and then also at one point I got frustrated with I had been coming to India almost every year, giving performances. They would always ask me where did I play from, what kind of tanpura I needed. They would provide the tanpura, someone to play it. Even sometimes that person could tune it, which was great. But then as time went on, they started disappearing, the tanpuras and the tanpura players, and they just wanted to give me this electronic box. And I thought, this is horrible. I mean, the tanpura is a beautiful instrument, and now you want to replace it with something that sounds like an electric shaver. And I really didn't like it at all, and I just thought there must be a better way, and then I found a better way. I think I can even show it to you here. So can you see this?
Oh yes.
Now
It
watch what
looks
happens.
very different.
It's a tanpura, right? Yeah,
Oh, wow.
you're seeing it from the end, but watch what
Oh,
happens.
okay. Wow.
So I developed this robot that could play a tanpura,
Oh,
because
wow.
I thought we go to the moon. It shouldn't be that difficult to to just play the 6 strings of a
Yeah.
tanpura,
Mm.
and it works beautifully. And
Mm.
for some years I had a small one. This is a vocal tanpura. We use this in the singing class.
Okay.
But I used to bring a small version with me to India, and I would put it on stage so I could have a proper tanpura sound when I played.
Oh, love. Mm. So, have you patented it, and is it available for other musicians to buy?
That's the problem. Um, it's they have to be fit to the instrument. So the tanpura has to be modified slightly,
Okay.
and then the mechanism has to sit perfectly. I mean, because
Okay.
the angle of the plectrums has to be exactly right, or it doesn't sound good at all. And so people, I had many people asking if they could buy one, and I said, look, first of all, you need both the tanpura and that thing on top, which is the motor with the disc with the plectrums that are moving. First of all, it's difficult to build. Second of all, we're in Switzerland. It's expensive. You'll never want to pay that kind of money to have it. But I freely share the technology with anyone who wants it. If they can make it in India and make a lot of money, I'm happy. I don't care. I don't want anything for it. It makes me sad if the tanpura disappears as an instrument.
That's so
But
beautiful.
but we use it in the vocal class, every time, and it fills the room with this what the beautiful sound of the
Yeah,
tanpura sound. It brings,
absolutely.
it's uplifting, and it's great. So I believe in it.
The Gundecha brothers described it as being the cosmic sound to which we are aligning our own energies.
Yeah, 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 and there's nothing like it, and you can't get it from those electronic you know
True.
boxes.
So, what is the wood that is used? Is that something that is similar to the original Tanpura? Okay.
Well, the woods, we took a combination of cedar, which is the family that this of woods that the Sarod is made from. It's a kind of a Indian cedar, and then we opted not to use a gourd because
Mm.
we needed it to be pretty
Compact.
flat, close and
Mm.
close to the ground. If you
Mm.
had a big gourd, you can imagine it would create a
Yeah.
huge angle. We tried
Mm.
it in the beginning and thought, oh, this is too much. So we just made a really big resonating chamber,
Mm.
and then put the light wood that you see perhaps
Mm. Mm.
is made of spruce, which is a beautiful resonating wood. So it has a big sound.
Mm. Very beautiful. So,
So
were there any other things that you experimented with
um, let's see. Oh,
for
I've
the Sarod, for the Sarod itself, which is difficult to tune and has to be tuned repeatedly, I think, even during a concert.
oh yeah, I developed the geared pegs for the
Mm.
Sarod. Yeah, that was also I was doing a teaching stint in in the Northeast in New England in the winter, and it was
Mm.
so cold, and I was just a nightmare to tune my instrument.
Mm.
Because the pegs were creaking and
Mm.
they were all dried out, and
Mm.
it was frustrating. And then then and there, I said, there has to be a better way. You know, all these instruments like guitar and they have gears that make it easier to tune
Mm.
the strings. There must be a way to put a gear onto it,
Mm.
and and I did research and I found out what it was. And again, I needed this craftsman to do it for me because I'm not
Mm.
a carpenter. I have ideas, but without them, I wouldn't have been able to do it. So
Mm.
those gears are implanted into the traditional peg. So many people don't even notice them because
Mm.
they see the traditional pegs on the strings, but then they look
Mm.
closer and they see a little metal band,
Mm.
and that's the gear that's been
Mm.
implanted into it. So that makes tuning a lot easier. Also, the tanpura that you saw being played,
Mm.
it has those same geared pegs.
Mm.
Yeah, and I also I became very sensitive about the sound of the sarod, particularly
Mm.
because so much of the sound is determined by the plectrum that you use. And in India, they use coconut shells, you know, and they file them and sand them and oil them. But a coconut shell has a lot of faults in it, and sort of you can see the faults in it, and it tends to be scratchy. But many musicians, it doesn't bother them. I think because it's so noisy in India that there's a filter. There's a filter that filters all that stuff out. But in the West, we're obsessed with sound and fine tone. Violinists will spend $10,000 on a bow, you know, the thing that produces the sound. And so I thought of saying, well, I bet we could make a plectrum out of a better
Mm.
material. And so
Mm.
we tried everything. You know, we all kind of different woods and quartz crystal and the horns from a deer
Mhm.
and a cow. That was pretty awful. That smelled pretty bad.
Mhm.
And and came up with a whole collection of plectrums that produce beautiful sound and less scratch, because if the plectrum is making a scratch as you play it, then it's interfering with the beauty of the sound. And it's quieter here in Europe, so I can hear every
Mm.
little bit of sound. I want it all to be beautiful.
Absolutely. Well, one of the keys of this tradition is the passing on of music from one generation to another. And in some gharanas, earlier they wouldn't even teach everything to someone outside the family.
Yeah.
So, is have you taught your music to your children, and do they enjoy? And where do you see music in your family life?
I basically in that way, in the same way as Kansab, uh, I have a huge family,
How lovely.
and anybody who is dedicated enough and talented, who wants to learn this music, they become part of my family.
Hmm.
I taught my daughter Sarod, and she played it for some years, but then she decided she didn't want to make that her profession. Maybe she saw how much her father struggled to be a professional musician, and she thought, no, I don't want that kind of life. And it didn't bother me at all, because my father was an engineer, but he didn't pester me to be an engineer. He said, if you can do something you love, you're the happiest man in the world. So we have a great collection of students here, and in past years, there's even some Indians living in Switzerland who've started at a young age, and they're playing tremendously. The problem with Westerners is that they usually start when they're adults, and the only ones who have a chance really are Westerners who already play a Western instrument, so that their hands are already trained, to make those movements that are necessary for the Sarod. So some of my best students, Western students, had played like me. They had played guitar for years. But these Indian kids who are growing up now, some of them started with me when they were 7 years old. That's the time to get them. Then the body just learns these things. They don't even have to think about it. It just comes.
Thank you so much, Ken, for such a lovely and engaging conversation. And we look forward to having you on July 6th at our travel of ideas, especially musical ideas outside the shores of Bharat. And clearly, you're a beacon of music in the West. And we would love to hear more from you on July 6th.
Sounds great. Thanks for asking such good questions.